Carl Panzram always said the first crime he ever committed was simply being born. It wasn't self-pity. It wasn't poetry. It was the closest thing to truth the world would ever get from him. His life began in 1891 on a small Minnesota farm, where hardship wasn't a season, but a climate. The Rowan County schoolteacher later recalled that Carl, the youngest of several children, was a boy who lived in his fists. But the reason for that lived deeper than anyone in town wanted to acknowledge. His parents were strict German immigrants, stern, distant, unyielding. Carl grew up surrounded by labor, cold, and silence. His father abandoned the family early, leaving Carl to drift through the world like a stray dog learning to bite before being kicked. The first time Carl ran away, he was 7. It was also the first time he was sexually assaulted. That moment, and the years of brutalization that followed in the Minnesota State Training School, shaped him into something the world wasn't prepared to confront. The school, advertised as a place to reform troubled boys, was a torture chamber hidden behind religion and discipline. Carl described beatings, floggings, being stripped naked and tied to a wooden board called the painting house. The guards called it discipline. Carl called it the beginning of his hatred. He later wrote, "I was taught by Christians to be a liar, a thief, and a murderer." By 14, he escaped again, angrier, stronger, and convinced the world existed only to hurt him. That was the year he stole guns, food, and eventually a boat, beginning a life of drifting across the United States. Freight trains, burglaries, robberies, fire setting. Every city he entered eventually regretted it. The pattern of his crimes formed in silence. Broken houses, ransacked rooms, people hurt or worse. Their stories scattered across states that didn't share information. Authorities in the early 1900s didn't yet understand what a serial killer was. They didn't have the language, the psychology, or the cross-state databases. So Carl slipped through everything like smoke. He served time in Leavenworth, Joliet, Oregon State Penitentiary, and half a dozen other prisons. The punishments were brutal, the escapes legendary. He broke into officers' homes while still wearing prison stripes. He stole yachts. He jumped from second-story windows. He wasn't a man avoiding punishment. He was a man challenging the world to break him. But it never did. It only made him worse. In 1915, after one of his many escapes, Carl traveled to New York, where he broke into the summer home of former U.S. President William Howard Taft. Among the items he stole was a .45 caliber pistol, the same gun he later used to commit multiple murders. When investigators discovered this years later, the irony was grotesque. Taft had once been Secretary of War, indirectly responsible for prison systems Carl despised. Carl claimed the theft felt like balance. His crimes escalated. He raped men on freight trains, murdered sailors, and committed killings in the U.S., Mexico, Africa, and Central America. He claimed 21 murders, though investigators could only verify a portion. Panzram bragged openly about his crimes, but detectives believe his numbers weren't exaggerations. They were fragments. What frightened investigators wasn't the volume. It was the motivation. Panzram didn't kill for pleasure. He didn't kill for money. He didn't kill for revenge. He killed, in his words, because people exist. Some criminals hide their darkness. Panzram wore his like armor. In 1928, in Washington, D.C., he committed a burglary that finally ended his run. During interrogation, detectives saw something unsettling. Not fear, not anger, but an absence. A man who had hollowed himself out so nothing could hurt him. He was transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, where he vowed to kill anyone who got in his way. And he did. In 1929, he murdered prison employee Robert Warnke by beating him to death with an iron bar. There was no argument, no provocation. Carl simply told investigators, "I planned on killing the first man who bothered me." Now, he had a death penalty case. But what shocked everyone wasn't that Panzram accepted execution. It was that he demanded it. He refused appeals. He refused legal defense. He threatened to kill again if the court delayed. His attitude wasn't bravado. It was conviction. He had spent his entire life being hurt. Now he wanted to end it. The most unexpected twist came from a single man, Henry Lesser, a young Jewish prison guard who treated Panzram like a human being. Lesser didn't lecture him. didn't preach, didn't try to fix him. He simply showed decency, something Panzram claimed he had never received before. Instead of reacting with hate, Panzram reacted with revelation. For 2 years, Lesser brought Panzram paper and pencils. In secret, Panzram wrote a long, brutally honest autobiography, one of the most chilling documents in criminal history. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was a confession, a psychological report, and a warning. He blamed the world, but he also blamed himself. He admitted to everything he could remember. He showed that brutality creates brutality, generation after generation. When reporters asked him what message society should learn from his life, Panzram responded, "I believe the only way to reform people is to kill them." A horrifying belief, but one that showed how completely he had been destroyed long before he ever harmed anyone. In 1930, Carl Panzram was hanged at Leavenworth. As the noose tightened, the executioner asked if he had a final statement. Panzram spat at him and said, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're fooling around." Those were his last words. After his death, Henry Lesser spent decades trying to publish Panzram's writings, believing society needed to confront how monsters are made. The manuscript eventually became one of the most disturbing autobiographical accounts in history, documenting abuse, failed institutions, psychological collapse, and the way early cruelty shapes future violence. But even now, nearly a century later, one question investigators still debate is this: was Panzram born evil, or did the world create him? He had been a victim long before he became a predator. He was shaped by institutions meant to save him. He was destroyed by the people who claimed to correct him. His life forces a darker question. If Carl Panzram had never been beaten, abused, or tortured as a child, would any of his victims have ever died? A question with no answer. A question that echoes through every modern case. A question that leads directly into the story of another man whose crime shook nations.